Not now, she said, holding my life-saving medication over the garbage disposal. My sister wanted our parents to watch me. Admit. I faked my illness for attention as my blood sugar hit 487. She filmed my collapse like it was her proof unit. The officer asked her to step outside. I was diagnosed at 13 following my first hospitalization for diabetic ketoacidosis DKA. My body had stopped processing sugar the way it was supposed to, and if my mom hadn't taken me to the ER when she did, the outcome would have been significantly worse. After that, my life got reorganized around insulin injections, a continuous glucose monitor on my upper arm, and a schedule that the rest of my family treated as a collective inconvenience. I don't say that bitterly. I say it because it's accurate, and because it matters for everything that comes next. My parents are not bad people in the way you might be picturing. They're conflict avoiders. They built their whole household around whoever was loudest and most in pain on any given day. And for a while after my diagnosis, that was me not because I wanted it to be, but because I had a chronic condition that required real, documented management. Copays and supplies ran about $300 to $400 a month after insurance. I had an endocrinologist. I had itemized bills. My parents had to actually engage with the logistics of keeping me alive. Jade didn't like that. Jade is 20 years old, 2 years older than me. She had been the center of our family's emotional universe for as long as I can remember, the one whose moods set the temperature of the house, whose needs got scheduled around, whose problems got solved first. When my diagnosis arrived, it briefly moved the needle. She responded by escalating. More tears, more needs, more fragility. And then, about a year after I got sick, she started describing symptoms of her own fatigue, body pain, cognitive fog. Nothing diagnosed. Nothing with a doctor's name attached. Just feelings that showed up right around the time my parents started calling to check on me more. I thought she was trying to understand what I was going through. I didn't know she was taking notes. Her insulin was stored in a labeled drawer in the kitchen refrigerator, rapid-acting in the front, long-acting behind it, organized by expiration date. I managed it myself. I had been doing so for 4 years. My parents knew where it was in the abstract the way they knew where the fuse box was present in their awareness, not something they engaged with directly. That drawer is important. Remember it. Jade came home from her first year of college 2 weeks early. She gave no explanation, not to me anyway. Within 48 hours of being back under our roof, she called a family meeting at the kitchen table, the same table where I do my evening glucose checks, and announced that $600 had gone missing from her personal savings, which she kept in a physical envelope in her bedroom closet. She accused me directly. No evidence. No receipts. Just the accusation, delivered across our kitchen table while our parents sat on either side of her like a panel. My mom said, gently, that maybe I should think carefully before I responded. My dad said nothing and looked at the table. Jade set her phone on the surface between us, screen facing up, and said she wanted it on record. She wanted me to say, on camera, that I took the money. Just so they could handle it privately, she said. Keep it in the family. I looked at her phone. I looked at her face. I've never touched your savings, I said. I'm not going to say I did. She picked up the phone and smiled. Not a hurt smile. Not even an angry one. The specific smile of someone who has already moved the pieces to where they want them and is waiting for you to catch up. That's fine, she said. We can do this the slow way instead. I didn't sleep that night. I kept replaying that smile, trying to figure out what she meant by the slow way. I had no idea yet that she'd been planning this for weeks. The next morning, I went to the kitchen refrigerator and pulled open the insulin drawer. There should have been 3 vials of rapid-acting insulin. There were 2. I counted again. I checked the dates. I looked behind the orange juice. 1 vial, roughly 3 days of supply, was gone. My first instinct was mundane. I was stressed. I had miscounted. I had moved it myself and forgotten. The mind doesn't go to your sister immediately, because the mind doesn't want to go there. I told myself I'd reorder from the pharmacy and adjusted my morning dose to conserve what I had. Conserve. That word sat in my chest the rest of the morning, and I didn't fully understand why. When I told my mom that a vial was missing, she suggested I check my room, my bag, maybe the bathroom. I have never stored insulin in the bathroom. I told her that, and she told me to wait until tomorrow to call the pharmacy because it was probably nothing, and she didn't want Jade upset. I stopped. What does Jade have to do with my insulin? My mom chose her words carefully. Jade was going through something. The accusation about the money had already put her in a fragile place. I should try not to escalate. I walked past Jade's door on the way back to my room. She was sitting on her bed with a diary open on her lap, writing. She looked up when she heard my footsteps. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then she said, "You should really start paying attention, Ren." I kept walking. But I remembered that diary. That evening, Jade found me alone in the kitchen and closed the door behind her. She was holding my missing vial in her right hand, rapid-acting insulin, still sealed, label facing me so I could read it. In her left hand, her phone. She set the phone on the counter, camera lens pointing upward. The red light that meant it was recording was already on. "I've been watching this family run itself into the ground for 4 years over your Diabetes Act," she said, like she was explaining something very obvious to someone very slow. "I'm done with it. One thing, you look at the camera, you nod. You say you've been exaggerating your insulin dependence for attention and financial support. You say it, and I give this back, and we never talk about it again." She paused. "It's not that hard. Nod now." I looked at the vial. I looked at her. I thought about the $600 I had never touched, and the drawer I had managed for 4 years, and my mother telling me not to escalate. "I'm not going to lie on camera," I said. "What you're doing is a crime, Jade." She shrugged, stepped toward the sink, opened the vial. She held it over the garbage disposal and counted to 10. She didn't say anything while she counted. She just watched my face. When she got to 10 and I still hadn't moved, she turned on the disposal and poured the insulin in. 3 seconds of sound. Then, silence. She set the empty vial on the counter. Not dropped it. Set it. Carefully. Right at the edge where I couldn't miss it. "You have 2 left," she said. "Think about whether you want to keep playing it this way." She picked up her phone and walked out. I stood at the counter for a long moment. The empty vial was still there. She had left it on purpose, not as a mistake, and not because she forgot. As a message, the next several hours moved in 2 registers at once. There was Jade's timeline, what she was planning, what she wanted from me, what she thought I was going to do. And then there was my body's timeline, which does not negotiate and does not wait. Without my full insulin dose, my blood sugar started climbing. Nausea arrived first, quiet and low grade. The kind you can almost convince yourself is anxiety. A slight tremor in my hands when I poured water. The faint smell of something chemical and sweet that I have learned to recognize from my own breath: ketones, the byproduct of a body burning fat because it can't access sugar. I know this process. I have felt it before, at 13, and I know exactly where it goes if you leave it long enough. It goes to abdominal cramping. Then to confusion at the edges, thoughts that feel like they're arriving through static. Then, at the far end of the timeline, to a place you don't come back from without intervention. I was not at the far end yet, but I was aware of the distance closing. Jade came into the kitchen twice that afternoon with her phone raised, narrating in a breezy voice. "This is what Ren does when she doesn't get attention," she said the first time, circling me slowly with the camera. "Look at her. Totally fine. Just performing." She said it the way someone says it when they've rehearsed it, just the right amount of exasperation, just the right amount of tired concern. She had the tone down perfectly. The second time she came in, I was steadying myself against the counter, and she zoomed in on my face, on the glucose monitor on my arm, on my pallor. She was building a case. Documentation, she thought, that I was faking my way through another episode for the family's attention. What she didn't account for, and what I didn't know until later, when an officer played it back, was that the kitchen refrigerator was visible in the background of her footage the entire time. And at one point, while she was moving around the counter for a better angle, her right hand came into frame. Her hand, holding one of my remaining insulin vials. The label was clearly readable. Her fingerprints were on the glass. She was in the shot. The weapon she had built to destroy me had been pointed at both of us the whole time. But I didn't know that yet. I just knew I was running out of time and I needed to act while I still had the clarity to do it. I waited until I heard the bathroom door close, then moved to Jade's room. I wasn't looking for the diary specifically, I was looking for my second vial, which I was almost certain she had pulled from the fridge. I searched quickly. I didn't find the vial. What I found instead was the diary, open on the nightstand, last page still face up. She had been writing in it recently. I read the entry. It was dated 14 months ago. 3 paragraphs in Jade's handwriting. She wrote about researching fibromyalgia online, the symptoms, the language, how to describe fatigue and diffuse pain in a way that sounded specific. She wrote about practicing in front of a mirror. She wrote, The attention finally shifted back to me. It took a while, but I figured out how. I stood there and read it twice. Then I took out my phone and photographed both pages, the date and the entry, before I heard the bathroom door open. I put the diary back exactly as it was and made it to the hallway before Jade stepped out. 2 photographs on my phone. Blood sugar at 362 when I checked the monitor in my pocket. I needed both of them to survive what came next. Jade came back to the kitchen an hour later. She had the last vial and her phone, and this time, something else, the boning knife from the butcher block, set on the counter beside her. She didn't point it at me. She didn't have to. She set it within reach, and that was enough. She placed the final insulin vial on the counter, framed the shot on her phone, looked at me. "Last chance," she said. "Look at the camera. Say you've been exaggerating. Say you've been using this to control the family. Nod now, and it's done." "Where's the second vial?" I asked. "The one from the fridge. Had an accident," she said. So there was one left. The one on the counter in front of me. My monitor read 4:10. I had been without a full dose for nearly 7 hours. I know the DKA timeline the way I know my own name. My endocrinologist walked me through it at my first follow-up after the hospital, and I have never forgotten it. Nausea and rising ketones in the first few hours. Abdominal cramping, accelerating confusion between 4 and 6 hours without insulin. At 8 to 10 hours of unmanaged blood sugar at my current levels, loss of consciousness becomes likely. After that, the outcome is no longer a decision I get to make. I looked at the vial. I thought about nodding, not because I would ever actually do it, but because I wanted to understand what it would cost. A false confession on camera. My parents shown the footage. My medical credibility destroyed in the only household where I lived. Jade holding that recording over me for years, forever, anytime she wanted to reset the power dynamic back in her favor. The cost of not nodding was also concrete. I was looking at it in the glucose monitor reading. I thought about the back door. About Mrs. Beaufort next door, 64 years old, retired school nurse, lived there 11 years, had watched me do evening glucose checks through the kitchen window more times than either of us had counted. I had seen her kitchen light on every single evening for 3 years. It was probably on right now. I thought, if I lose consciousness before someone who is not Jade finds me, the story dies with me. And I had 2 photographs and a glucose monitor reading and 6 hours of memory I needed to get to someone who could use them. I didn't move toward the camera. Jade picked up the last vial, wrapped it in the dish towel on the counter, and brought the handle of the boning knife down on it once. The sound of glass breaking inside fabric is quieter than you'd expect. Muffled, almost soft. But I heard it. Something shifted in me at that sound, not rage, not panic. Something structural, something that had been held in a kind of negotiating position for years and simply stopped. There was nothing left to trade with. No leverage she held that I hadn't already lost. And that meant the only math left was survival. She held up the towel with the broken glass inside and said, almost gently, "There's no medication left. There's no deal anymore. I just wanted you to know what happens when you don't listen." I looked at the back door. I looked at Mrs. Beaufort's kitchen light. "I heard you," I said, and I walked out. I don't fully remember crossing the yard. I remember the cold on my arms and my monitor reading 422 and the light in Mrs. Beaufort's kitchen window. I knocked. She opened the door, looked at my face once, and said, "Inside, right now." She had already called 911 before I finished telling her what had happened. I found out later she had called at 9:14 p.m. She'd been watching from her kitchen for over an hour, had seen me barely upright at the counter and heard raised voices go quiet and then raised again. And she told the dispatcher that a teenage girl with a medical condition looked like she was about to fall down. The dispatcher asked if there was visible injury. Mrs. Beaufort said, "She has a condition, and someone in that house knows what her medication is and where it is. Get someone here." The ambulance and 2 officers arrived at 9:22 p.m. Jade opened the front door before they knocked. She had pulled herself together in the minutes between my leaving and their arrival. Calm voice, cooperative posture, the practiced air of someone managing a difficult family situation with great patience. She told the first officer that her sister was diabetic and does this sometimes, that I got dramatic when my sugar was high, that I'd be fine, that there was really no reason for this level of response. She said it smoothly. She had been preparing a version of events her entire life. The officer stepped past her. The paramedic reached me at Mrs. Beaufort's kitchen table, where I had been sitting with a dish towel pressed to the back of my neck. My glucose read 448. My skin was clammy and my responses were slow, but I was still coherent, which I recognized as luck, because I was closer to the line than I had let myself fully acknowledge while I was still inside that kitchen. The paramedic asked if I'd taken insulin in the last several hours. I said no, and I said why, in as few words as I could manage. The second officer had gone directly through the back door into our kitchen. He later told my attorney what he found: the dish towel on the counter with broken glass clearly visible through the fabric, 2 empty insulin vials near the sink with prescription labels, still readable, and the boning knife from the butcher block. The counter looked, he said, like someone had been very deliberately leaving evidence of a process. He did not touch anything. He photographed it first, then called for an evidence kit. When he came back through, he asked Jade to step outside. She started to say something about documentation, about how the video on her phone would support her account of what had been happening with me for years. He said, evenly, that he'd get to that. She stopped talking. In the ambulance, with a glucose 4 in my left arm and an officer sitting across from me, with a notepad open on his knee, I told him everything. I kept my voice flat and factual. I used the same language I've always used for my own body numbers. Timelines, documented sequences. That is the language I was taught to use if I wanted to be believed, and it was exactly the right language for this particular conversation. I told him everything in order. The family meeting at the kitchen table, the false accusation, the camera demand, the missing vial the next morning, my mother telling me not to escalate, the garbage disposal, the filming, the knife on the counter, the sound of glass in the towel. I told him my phone had 2 photographs of a diary entry in my sister's handwriting, dated 14 months ago, describing how she researched and rehearsed symptoms of a chronic illness she does not have, in her own words, because, and I read it to him directly from the photo, the attention finally shifted back to me. I told him that Jade's phone contained video she had recorded herself, in which her hand was visible in frame holding one of my insulin vials while I was visibly symptomatic in the background. He wrote for a long time without speaking. When the ambulance pulled into the hospital bay, he stepped outside and made a phone call. I did not nod for Jade. I was not going to start nodding for anyone. My DKA was confirmed on admission. Blood pH indicating early metabolic acidosis. Glucose at 487. These went into the chart alongside the glucose monitor data. My endocrinologist had already been receiving remotely a record of my blood sugar climbing in real time from the afternoon onward, a timestamp log of exactly when my body started failing and exactly how fast. The broken vials, the knife, the insulin labels matching my prescription, and Jade's phone were in police custody by midnight. My parents came to the hospital the following morning. They did not come alone. A detective walked them through the diary entry, reading it in Jade's handwriting, while my parents sat in plastic chairs, and then walked them through the video footage, and then walked them through the timeline of Jade's medical claims over the preceding 14 months compared to Jade's actual medical records, which showed no fibromyalgia diagnosis, no specialist visits, and no treatment of any kind. My mother cried. My father did not speak for a very long time. I watched them process it. I didn't comfort them. I didn't have to. Jade was charged with unlawful deprivation of prescribed medication, criminal destruction of medical property, false imprisonment, and possession of a dangerous weapon during the commission of a crime. Felony-level charges. Her arraignment was 3 weeks after the night of the ambulance. I attended with my attorney and my glucose monitor on my arm. A restraining order was filed and approved. My parents installed a medical-grade lockbox for my insulin, keyed to me and no one else, bolted inside the refrigerator. It arrived on a Tuesday. I noted its serial number in my phone. I checked the lock twice before I went to sleep that night, and once more when I woke up in the morning, not because I thought it would fail, but because it was mine and I had earned the right to know exactly where my life-saving medication was at every hour of every day. My parents want to talk. There's a longer conversation to be had there, and I am willing to have it on my terms, at my pace, when I decide I'm ready. Not before. I have one thing left to say, and it's for Jade, wherever she's reading this from. You held my medication over a garbage disposal and counted to 10. You filmed me going into DKA and called it documentation. You broke the last vial and told me that's what happens when I don't listen. I didn't nod then. I'm not starting now.